The hall was completely silent. More than 3,000 global leaders, investors, and journalists had filled the Geneva Innovation Summit. Cameras from over 70 countries were broadcasting the event live. Then Elon Musk stood up. He gave a cold smile and turned toward the panel where Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat calmly. Elon looked him over and asked bluntly, "Mr. Traoré, how can someone from one of the poorest countries in the world expect to teach us about leadership?" A few shocked gasps rippled through the crowd, but Elon kept going. "Africa has potential, sure. But do you really think your military background makes you qualified to talk about the future of innovation?" His words cut like knives. Traoré didn't flinch. He blinked once, but cameras zoomed in. His hands didn't move. He slowly leaned forward. Calm, focused, not angry, just very still. Across Africa, people watching from their homes held their breath. WhatsApp lit up. Twitter exploded. TikTok streams were interrupted just to show what was happening. Something big was about to unfold. Everyone could feel it. Even the child in Ouagadougou, with tears in her eyes, whispered, "Please, don't stay silent." The room held its breath. Elon smirked, arms crossed, clearly expecting Traoré to fumble or lose his temper. But Traoré leaned into the microphone and spoke in a voice so calm it hurt. "You ask how a man from one of the poorest countries dares to speak about the future," he said. "But I ask you, Elon, how do you define poverty?" You could feel the air tighten. Is it a lack of technology or a lack of dignity? People shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. The moderator didn't dare step in. Traoré stared directly at Elon, his gaze steady. "We may not have billion-dollar rockets," he said. "But in Africa, we raise children who can face humiliation and never blink." Gasps, real ones. An African woman in the audience turned to the person next to her and whispered, "Did he just say that? On live TV?" But Traoré wasn't finished. "Your question wasn't really about leadership. It was about status, and status doesn't scare me." In Burkina Faso, a grandmother cried into her hands. In Detroit, a black teenager stood up and clapped at his screen. This wasn't just a moment people were watching. It was something they felt deeply. Then Traoré paused, just long enough for his words to sink in, and then he told a story. "When I was 8, I watched my village lose its only water pump. A company from the West had bought the land and fenced it off. The room froze. I remember my mother boiling muddy water, whispering to God that we wouldn't get sick. That was the day I made a promise to protect people." His voice broke not from weakness, but from remembering. "You call my country poor," he said. "But you never ask why it became that way." The moderator reached for her earpiece. The director backstage waved frantically to cut the mic. But it was too late. The moment had already gone viral. Millions were watching with tears in their eyes. In Cape Town, a young woman texted, "He's speaking my truth." In a Paris cafe, a Burkina waiter stopped mid-shift, watching the stream on a customer's phone. "That's our president," he whispered. And Elon? He wasn't smirking anymore. His face slowly changed, no longer confident. Something else entirely. No one had ever seen Elon Musk look like that, uncertain, maybe even shaken. Then Captain Traoré slowly reached into his coat pocket. The audience held its breath. He pulled out a small folded piece of cloth. It was soft and faded, pale blue with tiny white flowers. Gently he held it up. "This," he said, "was my mother's headscarf. She wore it the day soldiers came to our house looking for rebels. But there were no rebels, only fear and silence." You could feel the air shift in the room. "They beat my uncle that day," he continued. "When I asked my mother, why," she said, "sometimes people hurt what they don't understand." He paused. "You don't have to understand Africa, Mr. Musk," he said quietly. "But you will respect her." In the audience, a South African tech investor wiped his eyes. A journalist from Senegal stopped typing. Every single person was now listening. Back in Burkina Faso, people crowded around radios. In far-off villages, mothers stopped cooking. Taxi drivers turned up the volume. Even the children went quiet. That scarf wasn't just cloth. It was memory. It was pain. It was resilience. Elon looked shaken, but he said nothing. Traoré folded the scarf and gently placed it on the table in front of him. When you question me, he said, you're not just questioning one man. You're questioning every African mother who raised a leader with nothing but dignity and dust. A soft murmur moved through the room. Then it grew louder. The spotlight had shifted away from Elon. All eyes were now on Captain Traoré. But this time, it wasn't out of curiosity or surprise. It was respect. A woman from Brazil stood quietly and began to clap. A man from Rwanda joined her. Then a tech CEO from India rose to his feet. One by one, they stood not for show, not for headlines, but because something meaningful had just happened. The energy in the room had changed. The power had shifted. Elon leaned back, arms crossed, but his expression said it all. This wasn't the reaction he expected. The moderator tried to move the discussion forward. Thank you, Captain. Perhaps we can. But Traoré raised his hand gently. She stopped. Just one more thing, he said. Africa is not waiting to be invited to the future. We are already building it in silence, in struggle, and in strength. Phones around the room buzzed all at once. Breaking news banners lit up across screens. Burkina Faso leader stuns global summit, Musk called out. On TikTok, a teenager stitched the video clip, speaking through tears. My dad's from Burkina Faso. This just changed everything. In a dusty corner of Ouagadougou, 12-year-old Mariam sat on a wooden bench, holding a cheap smartphone. The live stream kept glitching. The audio dropped in and out. But she didn't move, not even to wipe the tears running down her face. From the doorway, her mother whispered, "You're crying, why?" Miriam replied softly, "Because he said what we all feel. And no one has ever said it before. And she wasn't the only one." All across Burkina Faso, girls who had never even heard of Geneva were watching a soldier in uniform speak for them, not with weapons, not with anger, but with words. Back at the summit, Captain Traoré's voice dropped low. Africa is not a question. Mark at the end of your sentences, he said. We are not your experiment. We are not your silence. The cameras turned to Elon Musk, but he looked away. That single moment, Traoré's scarf, his story, his steady gaze was now being translated into Swahili, Portuguese, Zulu, French, and Wolof, and back in Ouagadougou, Mariam looked into her phone and whispered, "One day, I want to be like him," not feared, just heard. She hit record, not knowing her short video would go viral too. At the summit, everyone was focused. Not a single person looked away. Then, Captain Traoré reached into his uniform again. This time, he pulled out a small folded letter, carefully handled like something special. I was saving this for another time, he said, but maybe the world needs to hear it now. He paused and continued softly. It's from a boy named Samuel. He's 9. He lives in a refugee camp in northern Burkina Faso. He unfolded the paper and began to read. Dear President Traoré, my father died when bad people came. My mother cries at night, but I don't show her when I cry. I want to be a soldier like you, not to fight, but to protect people. Please don't forget us. Traoré's voice shook, not because he was weak, but because he cared. I keep this letter in my pocket, he said, not because it makes me strong, but because it reminds me I can't give up. The room stayed silent. No applause, no noise. Even Elon looked down. In Nairobi, a grandmother wiped her eyes. In Harlem, a boy whispered, "That's the kind of leader we need here." Traoré folded the letter and gently placed it next to his mother's scarf. Then he said, "Leadership is not about power. It's about carrying pain with respect." The moderator tried again to speak. Captain Traoré, she said gently, "Some people say Africa needs help, not big words. What do you say to them?" He didn't get angry. He didn't even blink. I'm not here to fight, he said. But I can't stay silent either. He stood up. Cameras moved quickly to follow him. The lights seemed brighter now because the whole world was watching. Africa doesn't need pity, he said. We need partnership. We don't need charity, we need truth. He turned toward Elon Musk and said calmly, "You build rockets, we build survival." A quiet sound moved through the crowd. "While you race to space," he added, "my people race to get water before sunset." You speak of the future. We carry generations of struggle, but still we build. Still we rise. Then he looked straight into the main camera. "This moment is not about me," he said. "It's about every African child wondering if they matter in this world." In Ghana, a teacher stopped class to show the live stream. In Belgium, a diplomat stood and clapped alone. For the first time at the summit, people were crying. Not out of sadness, but because something had touched their hearts. The applause that followed was soft. Not loud, the kind of clapping that happens when emotions run deep. A woman in Sweden took off her headset, wiped her eyes, and said, "I've never heard truth like this before." Elon Musk stayed seated, arms crossed. His face was hard to read. But one thing was clear, the energy in the room didn't belong to him anymore. Captain Traoré sat back down, quietly, with dignity. The moderator, now emotional herself, looked around. "Would anyone like to respond?" she asked. No one? Moved, not the German AI expert, not the Chinese physicist. Not even the American senator in the front row. Just silence. And in that silence, the world remembered something. That real leadership isn't loud. It isn't rich. And it doesn't need permission. It only needs truth. In a small cafe in Lagos, a mother leaned over and whispered to her son, "This is the kind of man you become when your heart is clean." The summit was meant to be about tech and progress. Instead, it became a lesson in being human. No one said anything for nearly 2 minutes. The aide looked nervous. Traoré's face didn't change, not a smile, not a frown. Just steady focus. Then came his answer. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. But if truth embarrasses power, maybe power is the problem." He handed the phone back. The aide blinked. "He wants you to meet with the African delegation tonight." Privately, the news traveled fast. UN requests closed-door meeting after summit shock. Africa's quiet lion turns global heads. But Traoré didn't walk faster. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't gloat. He just took a small bottle of water, sat in the back corner of the summit, and quietly waited for his turn to speak again. Quiet power. That's what people couldn't forget. Across the Atlantic, in a West Wing hallway in Washington, D.C., 2 White House staffers stood watching a replay of the summit on mute. One turned and asked, "Do we have a relationship with him?" The other paused. "We've been watching, but we didn't expect this. Should we be worried?" Another pause. "We should be listening." On TV, Traoré was shown, placing the blue headscarf and the boy's letter into a small leather pouch on his lap. "Symbols?" A staffer muttered, "He's using symbols." That's how movements start. And they were right. By noon, Traoré's full speech had been translated into 22 languages. Teachers printed it to hang on classroom walls. Parents read it to their children at bedtime. From Harlem to Nairobi, Bamako to Brussels, the message was spreading. On Facebook, one mother wrote, "For the first time, my son doesn't want to be a rapper or footballer. He said, I want to be a protector, like Ibrahim." And Traoré? He wasn't running for office. He wasn't asking for power. He wasn't asking for anything. He was simply telling the truth. But in speaking his truth, Captain Traoré had become something more than a man at a summit. He had become the voice of a continent and a mirror the world never expected to face. As the summit broke for lunch, a journalist quietly approached him off camera. "How do you stay so calm?" she asked, "after being insulted like that?" Traoré smiled gently. Then he answered not with a clever quote, but a memory. "In 2010, I buried my best friend. His name was Karim." He looked out the window and went quiet for a moment. "We joined the army together. We shared bread, shared blankets, shared dreams. One day, during a patrol, we were ambushed. He took the bullet meant for me." Traoré's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed soft. "That night, I cleaned his boots, I folded his uniform, and I made a promise. I would fight for more than revenge. I would fight for respect." It wasn't part of any speech. It wasn't live-streamed. But the journalist, whose own father had been a soldier, choked back tears. "Do you miss him?" she asked. Traoré glanced at the scarf on the table. "Every time I sit at a table like this," he said, "I imagine him next to me, reminding me not to lose my soul for applause." As people began to return from lunch, voices and footsteps filled the room. Then something unexpected happened. An American woman stood up. Congresswoman Danielle Cruz, a Latina from Texas, asked for the microphone. The moderator hesitated, then handed it over. "I just want to say one thing," she began. "I came here expecting to talk about technology. I didn't expect to be reminded what truth sounds like." She turned toward Captain Traoré. "Sir, I want to apologize. Not because I asked tough questions, but because I've stayed quiet too long when others didn't." Traoré nodded quietly. "I grew up hearing the same tone Elon used today," she continued. "In classrooms, on campaign trails, in rooms where people like my father were ignored. But you," her voice trembled, "you reminded. Use that quiet dignity shakes more walls than shouting ever will." Her hands shook slightly. "My father was a janitor. He died never being treated as equal. Today, you honored him." The room clapped not out of habit, but from the heart. In the livestream chat, thousands of people typed, "Who is she? I love her. This is history. Africa is not alone." That same afternoon in Nairobi, a young teacher named Grace Mangi tried to begin her social studies lesson, but her voice caught in her throat. Her students, aged 11 to 13, sat still as they watched her wipe her eyes. "Today," she whispered, "you're going to witness something more important than any textbook." She placed her phone on the desk and projected the summit speech onto the classroom wall. As Traoré spoke about water, about dignity, about a scarf and a letter, none of the children looked away. Even the class troublemaker, usually distracted, sat up straight. Then he raised his hand. "Miss, is he a king?" The room giggled gently. Grace smiled through her tears. "No," she said. "He's something even harder to be. He's a servant of the people." By the end of the speech, even the boy who had joked had laid his head on the desk, quiet, moved. And Grace? She turned toward the blackboard so they wouldn't see her cry, but they noticed anyway. Because when truth is spoken with love, even a dusty classroom becomes a sacred space. That day, in a room with no air conditioning, no fancy equipment, just one phone and one voice, Grace prayed. She didn't pray her students would remember the speech. She prayed they remember how it made them feel. In Bobo Dioulasso, Burkina Faso, a small boy named Yakuba sat beside a wooden radio. He had no shoes, no clean water. No school classes had been shut down again due to unrest. But he waited patiently. The local station had promised to replay President Traoré's full speech, and Yakuba wouldn't miss it. When the crackling audio finally came to life, he pressed the radio to his chest like it was warm food in winter. He didn't understand every word, but he understood the heart behind them. He heard the voice of a man who had grown up with nothing and never let that turn into shame. "Mama," Yakuba whispered, "he talks like he knows us." His mother didn't reply. She was wiping her eyes with the edge of her scarf. And when the speech ended, Yakuba stood barefoot on the dusty floor. "I want to go back to school," he said softly. "I want to learn to speak like him." His mother nodded, and in that single moment, somewhere between static and sorrow, a broken spirit began to heal. Even through a battered radio in a forgotten village, hope had found its way home. 3 days later, as the summit came to a close, a final headline shattered the internet. President Ibrahim Traoré invited to address the UN General Assembly. The world watched as a UN envoy read the official invitation aloud. In it, the Secretary General wrote, "Your words reminded us that the future cannot be built on technology alone. Without truth, courage, and humanity, there is no progress." At first, Traoré said nothing. Then, quietly, he agreed, but with one condition. "I will only speak in New York if Miriam and girl from Ouagadougou can attend too. I want her to see that her voice lives inside mine." The UN agreed. Soon after, a photo made its way across every social platform. Captain Traoré, standing beside a young girl in a simple dress and headscarf. Both of them smiling, hand in hand. One Twitter comment read, "In a world full of noise, this is what leadership looks like." And in homes, schools, and small village corners across the world, people cried, not because of tragedy, but because dignity had finally been given a microphone. A week later, Elon Musk released a brief public statement. "I asked a question I thought was bold. I didn't expect an answer that would humble the world. I was wrong. Captain Traoré, thank you for your grace." But Traoré never responded. He didn't need to. By then, he was already on a plane to Ghana to meet flood victims. Then on to Niger to speak with children displaced by violence, quietly, without press, without cameras. Because he never did it for attention. He did it for the boy with no shoes, the girl with no books, and the continent whose voice had been ignored for too long. And that final moment captured on video where Traoré turns to the summit audience, looks directly into the camera and says, "If one sentence can shake a room, imagine what a generation can do." That clip became the most shared political video in African history, and millions wept. If this story moved your heart, if you cried for the children, or smiled with pride, if you saw your own family in this journey, don't scroll away. Click like to honor dignity. Leave a comment to let the world know Africa is rising. Subscribe to help us keep telling stories that remind the world who we really are. Let's build something real. One tear, one voice, one truth at a time.